This is SportsJam, and I'm Doug Doyle, and my guest today is already receiving praise for his portrayal of boxing champion George Foreman, and the Sony Pictures Classic movie Big George Foreman hasn't even hit the theaters yet. Camden, New Jersey native and actor Khris Davis joins us on SportsJam. Khris, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
What did you learn from your conversations with George in preparation for this role?
Well, what I'll say is I learned a lot about George, Mr. Foreman, by doing my research. Most things I learned about him by doing my research. But when I went to go meet Mr. Foreman, what I wanted to extract from him, from that experience, was some of his personal nuances. You know, we're all different when we're with our families or our loved ones, our friends, whatever. But Mr. Foreman, you know, I got there, I saw him, and I had this idea that he was probably nicer than the books and the media were saying. And when I got to see him, my idea was correct. He proved me right, that he was a sweet guy, that he was a gentle guy, that he was a generous and giving man. And that's what I needed. I needed to see him with his grandchildren, with his family. I needed to see him in his church. And these are things that no amount of YouTube videos could give me. His autobiographies couldn't give me those subtle and sweet nuances, you know?
I'm done. I'm not going to box anymore.
Do you know what you're walking away from, son?
I want to spread the word of God and what I saw.
How's being a preacher going for you?
It's hard.
Harder than getting punched in the face.
Sometimes it feels about the same. Hey, fella, come on and enjoy yourself.
Power company said we never paid the bill.
Really? There's only two things I know how to do. That's box and preach. And preaching won't pay the bills. You made me something once, Doc. You can do it again. It is my destiny to win the heavyweight championship belt again. Last time they saw me, I looked like Superman.
So now you look like the Michelin Man.
It's not the first time that you've portrayed a boxer. And we go back to 2016, New York stage debut, The Royale, basically playing a character that was inspired by the story of Jack Johnson. And I know their stories are very different, Khris, but do you see any similarities between Jack Johnson and George Foreman?
I think the only similarities that I could identify would be that they were both incredibly misunderstood. You know, they were both kind of pegged in this light of being the villain to some and the hero to others, you know, and I think that they both suffered that from the media perspective. So we didn't really get to experience either one of them on a really, really personal and genuine level. We got to learn some of Mr. Foreman later on when he came back and he was nicer, you know, to be general. But even still then, you know, you don't really get to understand who Mr. Foreman is as a person. And we all had these preconceived ideas of who we thought Mr. Foreman was or is based off of how we knew him, either from the grill or from his boxing history. But we didn't really know the individual the way that we knew a lot of Mr. Ali's life. We knew a lot of his personal aspects and what made his story so relatable. We didn't know these things about Mr. Foreman, and we didn't know these things about Jack Johnson. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to meet Jack Johnson, but when doing my research, it was very similar in that I had very little in the dramaturgy to go off of, but it was all based off of what happened in the media. He had an autobiography, or at least he was speaking to someone who wrote it, right? And they were in an interview style, and that was it. So I had to figure out, okay, what's the deeply human thing that we all can relate to from both of these men, right? What are those types of nuances? And I think those are the similarities. Everything else is completely different.
You talk about research, and anybody that saw you in Judas and the Black Messiah as Steel, I get the sense you're like me. You love history and you love to learn about these people and what was going through their mind at the time. It kind of motivates you, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it better informs the work that we do. You know, I can't, if I'm responsible for telling the story, then I'm in trouble. You know, I can't, Khris Davis cannot be responsible for telling the story. So I have to do deep and extensive research so that I understand what's happening at that time. What was the music that was playing at that time? Who was the president at that time? What were the social economic issues at that time? So you can really understand, what these individuals were going through. I mean, you brought up Judas and the Black Messiah. I mean, there's so much that you can read upon that can inform you, but it's very different than when you're talking to someone who had the experience there too. You know, and like with Mr. Foreman, you could imagine what it's like to be a heavyweight fighter, but until you're in the ring with a heavyweight fighter sparring, you have no idea what he was going through. What it took to come back again, okay, and win the belt a second time. These guys, these people in the ring are no joke, man. I had to spar with Cedric Boswell, 36-2, former pro heavyweight. Okay, that is life changing.
I bet.
That is life changing. So then that happens, right? And no amount of film you could watch. I'm a fight fan, and no matter how many fights I've seen throughout the years, nothing could have given me that kind of perspective other than being in the ring with Cedric Boswell.
And the fact that, you weren't really old enough when George was making his run to really follow him, but I understand you knew more about the Foreman grill than maybe the man himself before you started.
That's it. I just knew he was the grill guy and that he was the guy who lost to Ali, because that's the narrative that we wanted to tell as a society, as a group. We wanted to continue to tell that narrative. That was our hero story. Ali's story was our hero story, and Foreman was the villain. And somebody's got to be a villain, right? So that's all I knew. No one was talking about Mr. Foreman's legacy, his fight history, other than he was the hardest hitting heavyweight of all time. But no one went to go watch his fights. No one went to go watch his tapes. Everybody knows Down Goes Frazier, but no one's really paying attention to what he did to Ken Norton.
Yeah, that's right.
That was crazy. No one's talking about the Ronnie Lau fight. That was insane. So He has a crazy fight history that no one was talking about. And I'm excited for at least this film to bring to light some of those aspects,
Yeah, and you're getting praise from George himself and the director, George Tillman Jr. How was it working with George, being a lifelong friend of George? There had to be a little pressure on you there.
George Tillman, it was very collaborative, I got to say. He and I think about the work in very similar ways. We like to be incredibly thorough with our work. It was fluid. It was easy. We understood each other. It was almost as though we were speaking with our minds. We had a certain type of telepathy. He would look at me and I would know that there was something else we needed, or I would look at him and he would know that I wanted to try something else without saying anything. And we would build and build and build, scene by scene by scene. And, our shooting schedule was so crazy. There were some days where we were doing 6 scenes a day, 9 scenes a day, switching locations. You got to have someone that you can completely trust on an artistic level to show up in those moments, because there's not a lot of time. And I'm grateful that he was able to come around and trust me enough as his lead actor to be able to say, hey, I don't got to worry about Khris. I know that he's going to show up. Let's get these cameras up. Go ahead, do your thing. Let's knock it out. Some things we just didn't want to take. Scared me to death, Doug. I'm telling you, scared me to death. I said, George, man. Because he said, we do one thing. He said, all right, check the gate. I'm like, George, what are you doing? I said, at least give me 2. Like, come on, man. Because usually the first take is the warm-up take. But the thing, working with George, being that we were always in communication, always in conversation, made it real easy to do things like that.
That's a sign of, I think, a really good director, too, because you got to put your trust in, especially your lead actor, as you are well aware. You had to lose weight and gain weight throughout this because of the different scenes. How difficult was that for you?
It was difficult. Not because in the first half it wasn't difficult because I had to gain and lose. It was difficult because we didn't have enough time. So I was going from 228 one week when we're playing Young George. The next week, I got to be fighting Joe Frazier. So now I'm bumping myself up to 242. And I'm doing this week by week. And sometimes we were shooting out of sequence in the same day. So I would be Young George and Championship George in the same day. And that's where my theater background came in. And I had to jump into some physical character work to make that happen, to try to somehow create some type of alchemy to shrink myself, to not be a giant man and play a 17 to 18-year-old kid. But then the second half of the film, that's when it got serious. That's when it got hard, because we all know he came back a lot heavier, right? So in his prime fighting days, he was between 225 when he fought. I think when he fought Joe Frazier, he was 225. When he fought, who did he fight in Puerto Rico and he lost? Jimmy Young, he was 232, right? So we finished the first block. I was 225 because the last day of shooting, I was young George. So I was 225, right? We took 6 weeks off. I had a nutritionist, gave me a plan. The plan wasn't really going to get me up to weight. I mean, it was like 4,000 calories a day when I was at home, 5,000 calories when I was filming, 6,000 calories a day when I was doing some boxing training, but I wasn't going to make weight. So I had to mix it up to make weight. So I bumped it up to 7,000 calories a day, and I ended up going from 225 to 275 in 5 weeks. Okay? The heaviest I got was 228. Now that was hard. That was painful. That was a miracle. I'm telling you. I don't know how I did that. Sometimes I look at the photos and I look at myself in the mirror and I have no idea how I formulated and manifested something in my mind to make my body do that.
I think you're just motivated to be right? You're about.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, you're about excellence.
Yeah.
Mr. Foreman, that funny little grill deal you signed is starting to generate some substantial checks.
Really? Now I'm just surprised they chose a big old fat guy like me to sell a grill to help people get lean.
We're based here in Newark, so your Camden roots. I want to give you just a moment to talk about. What do you want to say about Camden?
Man, beautiful things come from Camden. You're in Newark. I'm from Camden, and sometimes these cities get a really bad rap, and lots of times what happens in these cities are out of the control of the people who live there. You're kind of just born into this fight, if you will, but beautiful things come from Camden. I'm proud of Camden, New Jersey. I'm proud of all of the people who come out of Camden who are also doing excellent things. I'm grateful that I get to have the visibility that I have and that I get to speak on it. But I also want to say that, there are hundreds of people who are coming out of Camden doing incredibly amazing things. And that's my city and I love it.
And Camden's very proud of you, Khris Davis, and congratulations on this role. Can't wait to see it in theaters. Sony Pictures Classics releasing Big George Foreman, and we're talking to the guy who portrays him, Khris Davis. Once again, thanks for joining us on SportsJam.
Thanks, Doug. It was good talking to you, man.
SportsJam is a WBGO Studios production. You can hear all the past shows by going to wbgo.org/SportsJam or wbgo.org/studios. You can also find SportsJam with Doug Doyle on the NPR list of podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Big George Foreman is now in theaters. Special thanks going out to Jerry Milani and Joe Favorito for hooking us up with Khris Davis. Until our next SportsJam session, I'll see you at the game.